Hi, everybody, and welcome to today's class. My name is Birgit Koopsen, and I'm a brand ambassador for Jelly Arts, and I'm in the Netherlands. And today we're going to do a class about the basics. So if you're new to gel printing, then you will probably learn a lot today. If you have done some gel printing already, then maybe you will get some reminders of stuff that you might have forgotten about, or what is not in your system yet and can be important to create great prints. So first of all, I will go over the product, how to use the plate, how to store and how to clean the plate. I'm going to show you how you what is the best way to roll out your paint to get a nice and even layer. I will also talk a bit about tools you can use to create texture in your prints, and I'm also going to do some actual printing to show you how you can build up some layers. I'm also going to talk a little bit about the mini placement tool, because that can be a really helpful tool when you do layer gel printing. So let's just turn the camera to my hands and I will show you how to work with a gel plate. So the two most used gel plates, not only by me, but in general, are the 5x7 plate and the 8x10 plate. And although I really like the 8x10 plate, for a demo like this, I prefer to work on the 5x7 plate because it's a little bit quicker, because you have a smaller area to fill with paint and texture, obviously. So I'm going to use this one for the demo. But this one I'm going to show you because it's a new one, how it looks, what you have to do when you open your package for the first time. So when you bought a gel plate, it's in this clamshell. And when you open it, then the plate is in there. And it looks like this. It's between two layers of two acetate sheets. And as you can see, the plate is completely clear. It will only look like this for about 2 prints, and then it will get a kind of a milky look. It stops being this transparent. Don't worry about that. It's normal. You will not keep it like this. And actually, I think it starts working better when it gets a little bit of that milky look, because that means that the surface is changing a little bit. And I think when you made a couple of prints and you cleaned it a couple of times, the surface gets a little bit less slick, and therefore the paint is easier to roll out on the plate, and it also sticks to the plate better, and it's easier to get a nice and even layer. So when you're starting to use a new gel plate, then the first couple of prints might not be your most perfect prints, because it gets better when you use it. So when you're going to store your plate, when you have used it for the first time, you have removed the acetate sheets. It looks like this. You're not going to put the acetate back on the plate, because if you put this on the plate, there's a big chance that there are going to be air bubbles between the acetate and the plate, and the pressure of the air bubbles might cause dents in your plate. You will get like these air bubble shapes, which are a little bit lower than the rest of the plate. And when you do some printing, you will see the outline of those dents in your prints. Of course, you don't want that. So the acetate sheet, you don't need it anymore. You can use it to cut a stencil from or something like that, but you don't use it to store your plate. Instead, you store the plate between two sheets of copier paper, like I have done here with mine. So a sheet of copier paper on both sides, because when you put the copier paper on there, you can just even it out and there will not be no air bubbles, and your plate will stay nice and flat. The surface of the paper will turn a little bit greasy. There is some mineral oil leaking out of the plate. That is not a problem, and it will never run out. I have a plate that's like 10 years old, and it's or 11 by now, and it's still working as it was on the first day. And if I put it on paper, still mineral oil is leaking out. That's totally fine. So I remove, and you can see it here on this sheet, that there you can see that there is this little the bit greasy part in the middle where the plate was, and that's the oil. But I use it several times, the same sheet of paper several times, and when I put it back into the shell, I have to admit that the plates that I work the most with, I never store them. They are just lying around in my studio, even on top of each other. I just make sure that there is a sheet of paper in between, and that there's no edges of the paper halfway a plate, like this. I always make sure I stack them like this, and the paper is totally covering each plate, because if you have them like this and the pressure of a second plate or anything else is on top, then you will start to see the line or the texture of whatever is on top in your plate, and it's the same as with the air bubbles. It will create a dent, and you will see it in your prints. So it's very important that you don't put anything heavy or anything textured on top of your plate, because you will see it in your prints. I usually put my gel plate on a sheet of paper, on white paper, because that way I will see the colors that I put on my plate. So if I would put my plate straight on this background, you can imagine that if I put a transparent color of paint on my plate, that the background will cause it to look differently than the actual color. And if you have it on a sheet of white paper, then the color you put on top of your plate will always look the way it actually is. And then I use some masking tape to secure my paper, because I don't want my plate to move around when I start rolling out paint or creating texture. So I make sure that it's not going anywhere. Now, as you can see, my plate is a little bit dirty and also used on both sides. I don't really clean my plates. In general, when I do most of my printing, I leave my paper on the plate until everything is dry, and then when I pull the print, all of the paint comes off and there is no leftover paint. But if there is leftover paint, I really like it when the bits of leftover paint show up in my next print. So when I start printing with a completely clean plate, then the first couple of prints are not my favorite, because they are too clean, because there is no distress, the colors are just too clean, and I like it if little bits of color pop up in my print that I didn't actually put on the plate for that specific print. But of course, there are you can think of circumstances where you actually really want a clean plate and you want a clean print, and then the best way to clean your plate is using baby oil. So the thickest paint will come off just with like baby wipes or a wet cloth, a damp cloth will take off most of it. But if you really, really want to clean your plate and you want to get everything off, you can just put a few drops of baby oil or vegetable oil or any oil, sunflower oil or whatever. You just put a few drops on there, and then with a paper towel, you can clean your plate. And even if you think that you had a clean plate or a pretty clean plate, you will then see that there's still quite some dirt on there, and you will get a lot of that dirt off using some baby oil. Now, if you have like really thick leftover paint on your plate, then there are a couple of other options to get it off. One of them is using a pickup layer of paint to pick up the paint that was left behind. But if you don't want to do that, then you can also use something like packaging tape or masking tape. And you can just pull off the paint from the plate. And I have a little bit of paint here at the side, so I'm just going to see if I can get that off, because then you get an idea of how that would look if there would be more on my plate. Where are my scissors here? So, and you just push it down, and then it should pick up, but maybe because of the baby oil, it's a little bit greasy and it's not coming off right now. No, I'm just going to show that again later when I have some real paint on the plate, because it actually looks really cool when you do that. So I'm also going to show you that. Now the gel plate is made to release paint. So you don't have to be afraid that the paint is not coming off. You will always get the paint off. And not only acrylic paint, but there are all kinds of paints, but also other products like markers, alcohol markers, alcohol inks, pastels, pen pastels, all kinds of things that you can put on the plate, and the plate will release it. And so I've been gel printing for over 10, 11 years, and I have thrown everything that I have in my big stash of supplies on my plate to try them out. And some products didn't work. I could not get them to work on the plate, but I have never, ever ruined a plate. So don't be too afraid. It might seem like a very fragile tool to work with, but actually it's not. So if you have a specific paint or a marker or pen or whatever, and you're like, can I use it on the plate? I would say just try, because never ever happened to my plates, except of course you have to be a little bit careful if you have like sharp objects, if you have like pens with ink or anything like that, you can't scratch in the plate, because then of course you will damage it. But the products have never damaged my plate. What you should not put on the plate is heat. So if I am very, very impatient and I want my paint to dry faster, I sometimes use a hair dryer, but only on the cold setting. So you should not use any heat on it. Better is it to work on two plates at the same time, so you can work on one plate while the other plate is drying, instead of sitting around and watch paint dry. Okay, so far the plate and how you should treat it. And then we get to what to use on the plate. So if you're new to gel printing, I always advise to start with acrylic paint, and it doesn't really matter which brand you use. I have several brands here, and I have way more brands than these, and they all work. So even the cheapest craft paint will work on the plate and will come off of the plate. The only thing is that if you use a little bit more professional paint, even if you use the student grade, there are so much more pigments in a little bit better paints that it pays itself back, because you only need very, very thin layers of paint. And the thinner your layers are, you can maybe imagine that if you have paint with less pigments, the thinner you make your layer, the less bright and vibrant your colors will be. So you really don't need the most expensive paint. I mean, I also have paints like golden that I use for specific techniques, but they are the really more advanced techniques. But in general, I would recommend paints like Amsterdam Standard or Liquitex Basics, which are the student grade paints of these brands, and they have a really nice consistency. So these are soft body paints. I prefer soft body paints over heavy body paints because they roll out much easier. It's easier to create a nice and thin, even layer of paint when you have a soft body paint. And yeah, sometimes it's nice to work with more fluid paints, but yeah, my personal preference is the soft body paint. So I use these a lot. I use a lot of the student grades of the professional paints, and they are in the end really not that expensive because you need just a little bit of it, and your prints will be so much nicer that it is really worth the money. But besides acrylic paint, as I said before, you can use almost any product on your plate. And I've tried a lot of things that worked out really nice, like alcohol inks. I'm a big fan of alcohol inks on the gel plate, but also pen pastel. But I have to warn you, when you start working with alcohol inks, you really might want to get a second plate, one specifically for alcohol inks. I've even written it down on my on the packaging that this is one for alcohol inks, so I don't mix them up. Because once you start using alcohol inks, they are so pigmented, and especially the yellow ones, they make your plate color yellow. And no matter what you try, whatever cleaning product you are going to try, the yellow will not go away. So your plate looks like this. And that doesn't harm the plate. It will work as before. You can do the same techniques. The paint will come off the same way. It's just the color. And if you work with thin layers, and if you work with transparent colors, it's the same as if you would put your plate on straight on this background instead of on the white sheet of paper. The yellow will make your colors look different. So you will not see the actual colors on your plate. So, and I can't do anything about it when I work with alcohol inks. I have to accept the fact that my colors look different, but when I work with acrylic paints, I don't want that. So I have a second plate that I use my acrylics on. So yeah, there are a lot of different products that you can use on the plate, but when you start, I always advise to start with acrylic paint because that is the easiest product to use on the plate. It's also the most used product on the plate. So if you look for inspiration or for tutorials or for videos to show you specific techniques, most of them will be with acrylic paint. So that's the easiest thing to start with. So I'm just going to make one or two plain colored backgrounds that I can create texture on later. And while I'm doing that, I will tell you a bit about the amount of paint and how you roll out the paint and why. So I always have some scrap paper on the side. This is to roll off my brayer in between colors. So I don't clean my brayer in between colors. I just roll it off. So most of the paint will be off and it will not affect the next color of paint. And you can just keep working and you don't have to clean your brayer all the time. I usually clean my brayer once every couple of weeks. I use it a long time before I think, oh, there is a layer of paint has built up and I need to clean it now. If I want to clean it, I have a speedball brayer here. This is my personal favorite. It's a soft rubber brayer. You can also get like a hard rubber or a glass brayer, but I really like the soft rubber because the hard rubber and the glass brayer, they kind of have a habit that if you have a little bit more paint on your plate, that it slides over the plate instead of rolling the paint onto the plate. So it's like it's too, now I don't know the English words, but it's like it's not has no grip to the paint. It's like sliding over the paint. So yeah, the soft rubber is my favorite. And then if I want to clean it, I just take out this part and I toss this in a bucket with water. And so I have a washing detergent here in the Netherlands that I use, but that I don't think that's available in the US. But Murphy's oil apparently does the trick. Just some Murphy's oil and water, and I just leave it in there overnight, and the next day I can just rinse off the paint, and my brayer is as good as new, as you can see, this one. So how much paint do you need? That depends a little bit on the brand, because some paints roll out, spread out more than other paints. It also depends on a little bit on the circumstances in your room, because if your paint is very fast drying, then you might want to use a little bit more paint. But in general, I try to keep my layers as thin as possible for two reasons. The first reason is that the paper can only pick up a certain amount of paint. And if you have a lot of paint on your plate, your paper will not be able to lift up the paint and you have a lot of leftover paint. And also you get the paint will start to create some kind of texture. It's like when you pull up the paper and paint stays behind on the plate, but it's also on the paper. It's like as if it's creating threads or something. It's creating a texture in the paint that I don't really like. The second reason is that when you want to create texture in your paint, what you basically do is taking away paint from the plate, and the leftover paint is the texture. And if you have a thick layer of paint, you cannot lift up enough paint to create texture, and you don't get a nice and crisp texture. Then when I roll out my paint, I don't go like this. As you can see, this is kind of creating this like oval shape on my plate, and it's not like spreading the paint really nicely, but instead of I lift up my brayer, I put it down, I lift it up, I put it down, over and over. And then I keep rolling until I have a nice and even layer and my colors blend nicely. And then if I feel like I have too much paint, then I roll off my brayer on my scrap paper. And then when I go over my paint again, it will pick up new paint, because the brayer can also only pick up a certain amount of paint. And then when I have a really, really thin layer of paint, I will pull the print. And then I can basically tell that my amount of paint is the right amount if my plate is clean after picking up the paint. So I'm going to throw in right away the mini placement tool, because then I can keep building on these prints. So this tool is created to build up layers and be sure that every layer is in the exact same position, so you don't get areas that fall out of the peek out of the first layer, but you get all layers nicely on top of each other. Plus it creates a wide border. So for instance, if you want to create a print that you want to frame or anything, then it's nice to have that wide border. So I'm going to lift it up, and this is my first print. And there's a little bit of paint left here, down here, but there are also some white spots on my paper. So obviously I didn't rub enough at the bottom. But as you can see, the layer is really nice and even. And the colors are nicely blended here. So a question I get a lot is, how do you avoid getting those brayer lines in your paint? Because a lot of people get those lines that show exactly where the brayer has been. And I'm just going to show you what I mean, and maybe you have experienced it yourself. So I'm just going to roll out some more paint. And that's a little bit too much, so I'm going to roll off some, but maybe you can see it here, and here, and here, and here, that you have these sharp lines where the edge of the brayer was. So what most people do is they push the brayer down too hard. Too much pressure on the brayer, and most people don't have like push them a brayer evenly. That's something that is not natural. So you push it down on one side more than on the other side, and that's why you get those lines. So it's very important that you try to brayer as loosely as you can. So you basically just guide the brayer over your plate, but you don't push it down. And that's the best way to get a nice and even layer of paint. So let's just also pick up this layer. And then I already made some backgrounds before we started, because then I can do the second layers and print on top of these. And we don't have to wait for those papers to dry. Because what I usually do before I add a second layer on, for instance, this background, I make sure that this background is dry. Because if the paint is still wet and I want to add another layer on top of the wet paint, then the wet layer will not pick up as much paint from the plate as a dry layer will. The paper just can't pull up more wet paint. So it needs to be dry before it can pull another layer of paint. But on the other hand, if you work with layers this thin, and you can see again, my plate is completely clean. If your layers are this thin, then they are usually also drying in no time. So you can just, if you have made a couple of these, you can just keep working. Now, sometimes you don't want your paint to dry that quickly, for instance, because you want to create a texture. For instance, if you don't have like a big texture plate or anything that you can pull down, press down straight away, but you have like a small stamp and you need to go and do this, then your paint will dry before you can pull it. And if you don't want that to happen, then you can use something like a slow dry blending medium. So mine is Liquitex. I really like the Liquitex because it is so fluid. In this case, fluid is a good thing because I can, if you would use this normally when you do painting with acrylic paint, you would take a cup of paint and you would add a certain amount of the slow dry medium and mix it, and then you will use it to paint. But I don't want to mix this with my paint outside of my plate, because then I always have leftover paint and I don't like leftover paint. I want to use all of my paint. I think it's a shame to just throw away paint that you can't use anymore. So I prefer to apply a little bit of the slow dry medium to my plate. And I ruined my cap, so I have to do it like this. And I'm just going to apply it to my plate, and then I'm going to roll it out. So I have a thin layer of that slow dry medium all over my plate. And now when I add my acrylic paint, while I'm rolling out my paint, it's mixing with the slow dry medium. And you can see it looks a little bit different than the first two layers of paint that I applied to my plate. You can see it also here on my brayer. That's because it's not mixed completely, but if you keep brayering, then the slow dry medium will mix with the paint and then give you more working time. So if I would want to do, if I would want to do very detailed texture, then I would have time to do so. But if you work with larger textures, quick textures, then you don't need a slow dry medium, unless you are in, I don't know, Texas or something where it's like really, really hot. And especially in dry areas, the paint will of course dry much faster than in rainy Netherlands. Okay, I'm just going to create texture in this color, and I'm just going to print it then on top of this one that I made before. And I'm going to use a giant bubble wrap, and I'm just going to push it down into the paint. And what you're basically doing when you create texture like this is remove paint from the plate. And that's what I meant when I said earlier, it is important that your layer of paint is really thin, because if you have a thick layer of paint, your texture tool will only pick up the top of that paint and not go all the way down to the plate and create open areas. So you don't get that nice and crisp texture. So now I want to print this layer on top of this layer, and I use my placement tool to create this layer. So I'm now going to use it again, so I can put my paper in the exact same position, and my second layer will cover up my first layer. So now I have two options. If I'm pretty convinced that my layer of paint is thin enough and all of it will be picked up by my paper. Then I can pull my print straight away without having any paint staying behind on the plate, which is what happened here. So this is my texture. But if if I'm not confident that my amount of paint is the right amount of paint, or if I made a very intricate print where I put a lot of time and effort in, and I want to be absolutely sure that all of the paint is going to pull and nothing is going to stay behind, I leave my paper on the plate until everything is dry. That means, for instance, let me do a sample. So this one that I also just made, let's print a new layer on top. And yeah, it doesn't really matter which colors I'm going to use now. It is about the technique and not about how pretty the prints look. So I'm just going to mix these two. And here I absolutely have too much of the purple. So, like I said before, I hate to throw away paint. I don't like it when I have a lot of excess paint. But if I have too much paint on my plate, I need to roll it off. But that's okay, because these sheets, these roll-off sheets, at some point when I think, oh, they look nice, I put them aside and I use them either as a first layer for a new print, or I use them in my junk journal, or I stamp on top, or I cut die cut from them. So sheets like this, my cleanup sheets, also get used. And for my next one, I want to make sure that I have a really thin layer, because I'm going to use this fake flower. And you can absolutely also do it with real flowers. I tend to do it when I have like a bouquet of flowers that is at its end. Then usually there are one or two flowers that are still pretty okay, and I take them out and I print with them. So I'm just going to push this down into the paint and then pick it up and push it down again. And I need to work quite quickly because I'm also talking. And while I'm talking, the paint is drying, but let's hope I was quick enough. So now, if I am not sure if my paint is the right amount, if I maybe used a little bit too much paint, or any other reason why I don't dare to pick it up straight away, I leave my paper on the plate until everything is completely dry. But you have to be careful that it is really dry, because if the paint on the plate already starts to dry, but your paper is still moist because of the wet paint, then the paper will tear, because it is not strong enough to pull up the dry paint from the plate, because it's moist, and then it will tear. So it's either pulling straight away or leaving your paper on the plate until everything is completely dry. So I'm going to leave this one now, because I already left it maybe too long. If the paint already starts to dry, then my paper might tear. And I have to admit, with this paper, it will be pretty okay. You will be more concerned when you have the softer papers. So let me also talk a little bit about the papers. So what papers can you print on? If people ask me what papers they can print on, I will say any paper. And then I really mean any paper. The only paper you have to stay away from is photo paper with the coating. Like if you have a glossy photo paper where you can, if you have like a photo printer and you print your own photos, the glossy photo paper has a coating. The coating will stick to the plate and will ruin your plate. So never use photo paper on your plate. But other than that, you can use whatever paper you want. From very heavy watercolor paper and Bristol paper to the thinnest tissue paper you can get. And all of them work. You just have to, there are a couple of rules to make sure that they work. So if you have like book paper, like this, from a little bit, maybe also a little bit older books, you can see here when I tear it here, it is like a very soft paper. It has a lot of fibers. It tears, when you tear it, you get this edge where you tear the top layer off, and this paper is more likely to tear, to rip when you pull it from the plate than, for instance, a paper like this, which is a very heavy copier paper, which is very smooth and what I call a hard paper. This paper will can stand a lot before it actually tears. So if you use the smooth and the harder paper, then the chances that you ruin your paper is way less than when you use paper like this. A lot of people think that tissue paper is hard to print on and that it tears easily. It doesn't have to be. You just have to make sure that A, you don't use too much paint, because if you use a lot of paint with tissue paper, the paint will just soak through the paper. And of course, then it will rip when you tear it from the plate, when you pull it from the plate. So thin layers and pulling straight away. Or with tissue paper, you can also do it like this, leave your paper on the plate until it is completely dry. And then the dried paint on the paper will make the paper so strong that it doesn't tear when you pull it up. So yeah, as long as it is not wet and the paint is not soaking through, you can very well also print on tissue paper. And the benefit of tissue paper is that it makes a very nice collage material. So if you like to do collage, or if you want to incorporate your own prints in your art journal, for instance, or in paintings or mixed media paintings, then tissue paper is really a good option to use. But you can also use craft paper, even just from like a paper bag, or you could even, if you want to, you can print on acetate sheets, you can print on wood, you can print on fabric. You can definitely print on fabric. If you want to print on fabric and also want to be able to wash your fabric, then you can either choose a fabric paint that has the consistency of acrylic paint. There are a couple of brands that are almost like soft body paints, but you can also just use your normal acrylic paint and add, let me see, if I have it here. Yeah, I have it here. Like a fabric painting medium. So it says on the bottle is exactly how much of the fabric painting medium you need and how much of the acrylic paint, and you mix them and then you print with them, and then you have to heat set it for fixation, but then you can actually even wash your fabric. So even if you are a quilter or something like that, then you can do some fun stuff with the gel plate. So let me pick this up. The paint is dry. And as I said, the plate is completely clean. And here I have my flower print. And I think it is amazing how two such simple layers, it's so easy to create this, can make a print like this. I really, really like this. Okay, so besides the bubble wrap and the flower that I just showed you, you can use all kinds of things to gel print, and they don't have to be expensive. As a matter of fact, some of my favorite tools are tools that are actually garbage. So I have a whole bucket here with all kinds of stuff that normally would be thrown out, and like, for instance, cardboard. So this is some packaging material from IKEA, I think, and this layer was also on this side. I just pulled it off. And then you get this like fun texture and cardboard. There are so many types of cardboard that are fun to use. Like this is also something that was in packaging material, or just a corrugated cardboard box, and just cut out a piece and then peel off that top layer. Here's another one with that honeycomb texture, which is fun. Also fun is to not pull off all of that layer and leave a little bit on to create a distressed look. This is also packaging material, which creates a really nice, I don't know if I have it here. I think I have a sample of that. Yeah. So I have some more samples that I can show you what I use to create texture. So this texture was created with this packaging material, some old chipboard letters, of course, something like onion nets and carrot nets, and I have made this texture tool from a piece of cardboard, and I just glued some buttons on there. What else do we have? Here are some sewing, what are they called? Spools? I think they're called spools. I'm not sure, but you know, you can see what they are, right? And some of my favorites are pill blisters. So there I also have this sample pill blisters. This one was made, for instance, with pill blisters. So you can create a really nice texture with those. What else do I have here? This is, for instance, just a piece of lace. Lace is also really nice. This is just a handful of thread, like this. Just sewing thread. And then first I made this one. Let me show you. Where is it? First I made this one. So maybe I can actually really quickly show you how to do that and create two prints out of one layer of paint. So I'm just going to put this aside. I really like the thread prints, so I'm just going to show you that one. Just make some room. So here we have the plate in the middle. Yeah. And I can use one of my background prints that I made before we started. Let me see, where is one? Here. Let's just use this one. And now I'm going to add a contrasting color, in this case a darker color. If the colors on my background would be dark colors, then I would use lighter opaque colors for this layer, but because I have bright and light colors on my background, I'm going to use the darker colors for the next layer because I want a nice contrast. And then I'm just going to, again, make sure my layer of paint is nice and even. And then I'm just going to spread out randomly some thread and yarn on top of that layer. It's a bit messy now because I didn't sort that out before I started, but let's just go with it and see what happens. So now I can, of course, again, use my tool to get this in the right position. And then I'm going to place this on top. And the yarn is kind of masking. Yeah, it's kind of creating a mask. So the paint will not transfer to the paper wherever there is a piece of yarn or thread. So I'm going to make sure that I go into all the open areas. I can feel it with my fingers. That's why I rub it with my hands and not with my brayer. So I can make sure that I go into all the open areas. Then I lift it up and remove the thread. That's when I get this. Pretty cool. But then I also have this, the leftover paint on the plate. And now I could have done two things. If I'm quick enough, I could just take another background that I already printed and print this straight on top. But this layer dries really quickly. And once it's dry, it will not be picked up by the paper. When there is wet, dry paint on the plate, we need something to lift it up from the plate, and that can either be the tape that I talked about before, but that can also be a new layer of paint, because if the new layer of paint sticks to the paper and you pull it up, it will also pull up the dried paint from the plate. So I'm now going to wait until this paint is completely dry, because if it's still a little bit wet and I add a new layer of paint, you can imagine that I just mix it with the paint that's already there and I will just lose this texture. So I have to make sure this layer is completely dry. And now I'm messing up my, okay, going to take another brayer. I think this is already dry because it's so thin, the layer, and it is kind of warm here today. So now I can just add another color or several colors on top, create a second layer on top of the dried layer. What other color am I going to use? The pink, I think. And I will have some paper ready. Okay, let's just roll this out. And again, make sure that it is a really thin layer of paint. But don't make it too thin, because if it's too thin, then you will also not be able to pick up anything. Not sure about this color, but as you can see, I'm not using the tool right now because you don't need the tool to print. If you're not keen on the white border, and if you don't want to build up layers in the same position, then you don't need the tool. It's just handy if you want everything to line up. But if you're just printing because you're going to use that print for something else, cut something out of it, or you can print more layers on top, then you don't need that, that tool. Okay, so now I'm going to lift it up, and there we have the texture that was left on the plate. So this was my first print, and this is my second print. I think it should be this way. No, it's this way around. This is the same. So the texture you see in this one is the paint that was left underneath the thread. And what happened here with the thread is also what will happen if you use a stencil. So if you create a stencil, this is your first print. And then when you lift up your stencil, there will always be some paint left behind on the plate. And then you can leave that to dry. And when it's dry, you can use another layer to pick it up. And then you have two very different prints that both are really nice. Okay, so I could go on for a couple of more hours telling you about all the techniques and all the things you can do on the gel plate, but I only have an hour, and so I have to stop now. I hope that you learned something new, and that you got inspired to take your gel plate out and play a little bit. I will be back next month, and in the next class we are going to create cards like these. So if you like that, then I hope to see you again then. And for now, I wish you all the best, and hopefully see you again in one of my upcoming classes. Thank you so much. Bye. Bye-bye.